Thanks for tuning in to Thriving Canine Radio. My name is Dawn, and today we are going to go in the field to look at canine behavior in a whole new way. And joining me in this conversation today is Temple Grandin. Temple, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's really good to be here.
So Thriving Canine Radio broadcasts to a global audience, and there are going to be listeners out there who have not heard of Temple Grandin or her story. So I'd like to take just a moment to introduce Temple as well as give our listeners a sense of who she is and what she's accomplished in her life. So Temple Grandin is an American doctor of animal science. She's a professor at Colorado State University, a best-selling author. She is a consultant to the livestock industry on animal behavior. And on top of all of this, she is also autistic. And what we're going to learn from her today is how her autism has allowed her to excel in the animal world by perceiving them in a different way than those of us who don't have autism. And her story is so fascinating, in fact, that there is a movie called Temple Grandin made about her, explains her life, explains her story. And Temple, I am just so thrilled to have you on our show today. And I'd like to begin with this question. Having autism has allowed you to perceive the world differently, very similar to how an animal perceives the world. Can you explain that a bit for me?
Well, I'm a total visual thinker, and I discuss that in both of my books, Animals in Translation and Thinking in Pictures. And I don't think on words. Words narrate the pictures in my mind. Well, an animal is a sensory-based thinker. You want to understand an animal. You need to get away from verbal language. You've got to think in pictures, think in audio clips, think in smell whiffs. Think about how much information the dog gets off the local tree. He knows who's been there, how long ago they were there, are they friend or foe. There's a lot of information on that tree. And so you want to try to think about a world where there's a lot of information, but it's not in verbal language. Just how I think. Now, the thing about visual thinking is a continuum. You know, there's artists and some non-autistic people that are also visual thinkers. You know, and some people are more visual than others. Like if I say to you, think about a church steeple, I was really surprised to find that a lot of people get this vague, generalized church steeple. I don't have a vague, generalized church steeple. I just have a whole bunch of specific ones. You know, it's much more specific. When you think in words, you drop out details. And the animal's world is a world of sensory detail.
Okay. When did you realize that you were seeing in a similar way to the animals?
Well, it was kind of a gradual realization because when I was in high school and when I first started, I thought everybody thought in pictures. One of the things that really gave me the realization was when I started interviewing other people about how they think, and that was back when I did my book, Thinking in Pictures. So I started interviewing people about how they think. And my first sort of breakthrough in realizing that my thinking was different was when I asked some people, especially a bunch of speech therapists at an autism meeting, think about a church steeple. And I was shocked to find out they just got this vague, generalized kind of stick figure where I only see specific ones. So I then started asking a lot of different people these kind of questions. I asked that question to an astrophysicist, and he saw a whole bunch of steeples, and then the people standing up and kneeling down in church. He tends to translate everything into motion, which is a different kind of thinking. But I really got interested in this whole idea of how different kinds of minds think in different ways. There's also people that are mathematical pattern thinkers. That doesn't have anything to do with pets, but, you know, that not everybody thinks the same way. Now, you can do things to help to increase your ability to think in visual thinking. You know, if you kind of shut your eyes and sort of imagine, then you can. Like if I say to somebody that tends to think of the church steeple as a stick figure and I force them, I can get them to see the churches down the street or maybe the one they go to. But I kind of have to force it because for a lot of people, the default setting is to just see that generic, generalized image. And I got more and more insight into animals as I realized that my thinking was different. But this kind of thinking is a continuum. There's a lot of non-autistic people, too, that are good at visual thinking. And I found there's a lot of people that are dyslexic and have other learning problems that are often really, really super good with animals.
And what do you attribute that to?
I attribute it to getting away from strictly verbal language. What I have found is people that are very verbal and have a hard time with sensory-based thinking often have a hard time understanding an animal. I find that some people just don't get it. Like if you watch the movie, you saw the scene in there where I made the non-slip ramp going into the dip vat, and then the people put a metal plate on there to make them slide. It's hard for a lot of people to get their head around the idea that the cattle need a non-slip surface to walk on. I mean, to me, it's absolutely obvious. The thing that frustrates me is people are still making that same mistake today on my center track restrainer system that are used at the big beef plants. I have the same exact design, just like it's shown in the movies, and the cattle walk down that to go onto the conveyor, and I've got plants taking the cleats off and making it slippery. And I've talked to some of these people, and they're well-intentioned, but they just can't get their head around the fact that the cattle will walk in there if you give them a non-slip surface to walk on.
Right. So what's interesting is, today in America and probably around the world, the percentage of homes or the percentage of families that have dogs is incredibly high. And a lot of times what I see are people getting frustrated because dogs aren't acclimating into the human being's world very well. And it's really not a natural environment for a dog to be in a house. And
I think the problem is we're keeping the dogs in such a controlled life. And when I was a child back in the 50s, all the dogs ran loose in the neighborhood, and we did not have behavior problems. Because when the young dogs came in, they got socialized by the older dogs. Dogs had a whole doggy social life. Now with the draconian leash laws that we got here in Fort Collins, to give a dog a good life, you've got to really go to a lot of work. You have to take it out to the dog park, and you got to take it out and socialize it to other dogs, socialize it to other people. Where that just sort of got done by itself, and in my childhood neighborhood. And the other problem I'm seeing today is you've got some families today where there's no pets in their life at all. I did a book signing for my book, Animals Make Us Human, at a Costco down in South Denver, where I was going to have to stand by a book table for 6 hours, which was going to get rather boring. So I started just walking up to people and trying to sell books. Mm-hmm. And I basically targeted every young family that came by me, all the families with young kids, all the older people I targeted, the teenage boys I tended to leave alone. And I just walked up to them and I said, I'm a professor of animal science. This is my book on animal behavior. Do you have pets? And I was shocked to find out that about 20% of the young families that I contacted in that store, would have been 2 years ago, there were no pets in their family, not even a gerbil or a parakeet.
Interesting.
And I think that's really terrible. And I visited some schools, and there's no little pets in the classroom, like a gerbil. So there's a lot of dogs and a lot of cats out there. But unfortunately, there's a bunch of young families now that have no pets. I mean, their kids are growing up in a pet-free world. And I think that's really bad.
Now, I'm currently in the process of reading Animals in Translation, and you wrote in that book, people and animals are supposed to be together.
Well, they're supposed to be together. In fact, I just found a brand new article that was done on epilepsy patients where they had deep electrodes put into their brain to monitor their epilepsy. And some of these electrodes were put down into the amygdala, into the emotion center. So some scientists thought, well, it might be interesting just to try an experiment, and we're just going to show these epilepsy patients when they're hooked up to all this gear, pictures of animals, pictures of people, and pictures of just ordinary objects, things like chairs and tables. And the brain, the emotion center in the brain tend to really pay attention to the pictures of animals. It's like we're genetically tuned in to pay attention to animals. I just thought that was such an interesting study.
You write in your book that animals see what is really there, and people have a tendency to see what they expect to see.
Well, people tend to not notice visual detail. I've discussed this in a lot of my books. In my very earliest work with cattle, I noticed that the cattle were afraid of little things that people tend to not notice, like a chain hanging down the entrance of a chute, a reflection off a puddle, a reflection off a shiny metal. They tend to not see those things. Now, the cattle see that stuff, and then they don't want to walk through the chute. Now, I can make big verbal checklists to help people to see those things, but it's going to be giving me job security because I'll go in a plant or I'll go in a feed yard and they go, oh, I can't get the cattle up the chute. And then all I do is stop a gate from jiggling. I went to one place where this little gate just jiggled. Well, the cattle wouldn't walk by the gate that was jiggling.
Right.
You know, people are always asking me if they're afraid of getting slaughtered. Well, in this situation, they were afraid of the jiggling gate. When I got the gate to stop jiggling, the cattle walked right in. The plant manager's like smacking himself on the head and going, well, why couldn't I see that?
Right. Right.
Well, I think some of this gets us to differences in perception because it's something that's just so obvious to me.
Now, you bring up a really interesting point, and you do talk about this in Animals in Translation, is just a moment ago you said, people want to know, are the animals afraid of being slaughtered? And I think a lot of human beings put their own intelligence and their own emotion they project that onto animals.
That's right. That's right. And I wanted to answer that question earlier in my career. Do animals know they're going to get slaughtered? So I would go over to the local Swift plant over in Tucson, Arizona, and then I'd run right out to feed yard, and I'd watch the cattle going up the vaccinating chute. And I found they behaved exactly the same way in both places. And if you get rid of the things they're scared of, like it's too dark, if it's too dark in the plant, they won't go in. So you got to light up the entrance. You get rid of the piece of shiny metal that jiggles, and then they'll walk right in. And I was amazed. I'm amazed at the number of slaughterhouses I can fix with duct tape, zip ties, cardboard, a portable light, and you put the portable light up on the chute entrance. I put the cardboard up so they don't see the people walking by. Then there might be a place where there's a shiny reflection on a piece of metal, so I cover it with a piece of cardboard, and I realize that's not a permanent fix, but it fixes it enough just to demonstrate the principle. Hang up some conveyor belting so they don't see some other distraction, and guess what? And the cattle walk right in. And it works so well, I almost myself have a hard time believing how well it works, that I can fix a plant with cardboard and duct tape and a light.
Right. So it wasn't that the animals were afraid of, the end of their life being moments away. It was just the situation that was making them nervous.
Well, it's a situation of there's certain things that tend to attract an animal's attention. Rapid movement, contrast of light and dark. I was in one place where they had a gray concrete wall, and there was a yellow ladder on the wall, attached to the wall. And the cattle didn't want to approach the yellow ladder. And then we just painted that gray and reduced the contrast, and then it was fine.
Right.
So they're sensitive to contrast. They're sensitive where a floor changes, from maybe a metal floor to a concrete floor. Or there's a metal strip going across the floor, and they'll stop at that.
Right. Right. So what do you say to individuals who say, oh no, I know my dog feels guilty for chewing up the remote control?
Let's talk about animal emotions and what's known. In fact, myself and Nancy Erlbeck, a colleague of mine, we've just published a paper in the journal Animal Science on environmental enrichment for animals, and we talk about the basic emotional systems, and this is also discussed in my book, Animals Make Us Human. And neuroscience shows very clearly that there's 4 very basic emotional systems of fear, separation distress, rage, and seeking. Seeking is the urge to explore. Also, there are emotional circuits for mother-young caring and nurturing behavior, sex, and play. Now, one of the problems is all this research that shows that animals have emotions has been over in the neuroscience literature. And it hasn't shown up in the veterinary literature because there's a certain bunch of people in the veterinary profession that don't want to admit that animals actually have emotions. Now, they have the same emotional systems that we have. All mammals have them. But the difference between a human being and a dog is simply the cortex complexity. We have a much bigger computer, so emotions will be analyzed in a much more complex way. Also, some of the instinctual patterns are different. Let's take, for example, in dogs. People like to hug their dog. Well, Patricia McConnell explains that when you hug the dog perceives that as dominance, especially if you do it right across the shoulder. Because in the dog, when you put the arm up over the shoulder, that's a dominance thing. In humans, it's like lovey-dovey. It's like wired to a different emotional system.
Yep.
And dogs tolerate it, but they don't really like it. I mean, go on Google Images. Type in kids hugging dogs.
Right.
And you will see that most of the dogs have their mouth closed. Now, that doesn't mean that, the dog's tolerating it, but he's not real relaxed. Like on the paperback copy of Animals in Translation, the one that's got the black cover, there's a dog on there with a very, very relaxed, open mouth. Where in animals that make us human, there's this guy kind of a gold-colored dog on there. His mouth is closed. I'm going to call him sort of anxious dog. And when dogs are completely relaxed, the mouth's going to be like, part way open, tongue a little bit extended, not panting. That's the relaxed open mouth. And if you look on those Google images, you're not going to find the relaxed open mouth on most of those dogs that are being hugged unless they're squeezing down around the waist. And then you get away from the fixed action pattern, hardwired pattern up there in the shoulders.
I see.
And so there's some situations where dogs have some behaviors wired up a bit differently than we do. And the reason why you choose the remote control is because you've touched it. It's going to be your favorite CD that he chews up because that's the thing you touched, or your favorite book he's going to eat up because you've touched that.
So your scent is on it, is what you're saying, your smell.
That's right. I'm saying he will chew up the TV remote because you've touched it. He'll chew up your favorite book because you've touched it. Some CD you never touch, that's not going to be the one he's going to chew up.
Okay, so when human beings say, I'm certain my dog understands when he's done something wrong. You
get the thing where you come home, the dog is like chewed something or is messed in the house and he's slinking around. Now, is it because he knows he's done something wrong, or does he just know dog poop on the floor or chewed up stuff is bad?
Right.
And there was an experiment done where they just took dog poop and put it on the floor, and the dog was, acted upset about it even though he hadn't done it.
Right.
See, one of the differences between an animal and a person is we have a lot more what's called association cortex. Animals will sometimes make odd associations. Like if a dog gets hit by a car, he might get afraid of the place where he was hit and not associate it with the car, because he'll associate it with a piece of pavement he was looking at right at the moment he got hit. An animal might get afraid of a black hat because a person that abused him was wearing a black hat, and that's what he was looking at right when he was getting hit.
Okay.
They'll make associations that to us don't seem logical. We have a much higher order association ability because we got a much bigger computer sitting up there on the top of our heads. But the animal will tend to associate some really bad thing, like being beat up, with the thing that he was looking at or hearing right the moment that it happened.
Right.
Like you might have a dog that's afraid of Nike-type shoes. Well, what do you think the dog was looking at when somebody was beating it up?
Got it. Okay.
Or might be afraid of guys with beards. They'll tend to pick out something like, or just afraid of guys in general. Unfortunately, really common fear thing in animals is girls are good and boys are bad. I hate to say it, guys, but it's the guys that are more likely to abuse the animal.
And that's why. That's where that association comes
That's where that comes from. And it's very, very common. I have talked to lots of people where their animal is afraid of men, or they've adopted a dog and it's afraid of men. That's very, very common. So
when human beings like to project their emotions onto animals, we have a much more complex associative.
Well, you see, we probably wouldn't make the association that guys with beards are bad. We would probably be more likely to make that a certain person is bad.
Got it.
Now, I think I'm looking at some of this stuff. Instead of talking about this emotion thing in generalities, let's talk about it in much more specific things. Because what I find in trying to troubleshoot dog behavior problems is people will use these verbal things. They'll say, oh, my dog goes berserk. What do I do about it?
Yes.
And I go, what do you mean it goes berserk? I don't know what that means. Is it some cute little dog that's jumping on people and all happy? Or is it some dog that's just biting people?
Right.
Maybe both of those kinds of behaviors could be described as berserk. And I find I have to question. I had a lady say to me, well, horse is crazy. And I questioned her, and I questioned her, and I finally got it down that the only time this horse behaved badly was when you put it in the cross ties. And I think it had an accident when in the cross ties. And I said, you know what? You don't need to use cross ties. Let's just get rid of cross ties. We can just take the thing he's afraid of out of his life.
Right.
But then if it's something like guys, I can't take men out of an animal's life.
Right.
I'm going to have to try and work on gradually desensitizing them. And one of the really good ways to do that is to get the seeking system turned on, because seeking tends to turn off fear. So I get the dog doing something he really likes to do in the presence of the thing he's afraid of.
So that you recondition him to have a better association.
That's right. But very severe fear memories in very, very high-strung nervous animals are extremely difficult to get rid of.
Yep.
Completely get rid of.
Right. So tell me, in your opinion, why first experiences and keeping them really good, really positive is so important.
Oh, it's really important to have a first experience with a veterinarian for a puppy. It needs to be a good first experience. Let's make sure a puppy gets to go on a non-slip floor. So it might be a really good idea for you to bring a bath mat in from home that's got a rubber backing on it, a bath mat that the puppy's familiar with. You put that on that slippery, slidey table so puppy's not slipping and sliding around. That's very frightening. The fear of falling is a primal fear. So you put the dog up on a table. It's like a skating rink. The dog is going to get afraid of that. You don't want to be doing that. First experiences with the kennel. First experiences with going in a car. First experience in the car should not be a trip to the vet.
Right.
Because if first experiences with something new, like a horse trailer or going in a car, are bad, well, you can really get a fear memory. And it's hard to get the animal over that. First experiences, it's kind of a survival instinct. I mean, just think about it. If you're living out in the wild, and I went down and walked into this one particular valley and there were lions there, well, maybe it might be a good idea to stay out of there.
Right. Okay, so and you know what? You just brought up a point that I never in a million years would have thought about. The idea of bringing a bath mat in so that the slippery table, because you've seen it. Anybody who's taken their dog to the vet has seen that skating dance that they do when they're just...
And they're freaked out because what's happening there is it's the fear of falling. The fear of falling is a primal fear. You have a thing called the riding reflex. I mean, cats have a super riding reflex. You can cat and it will land on its feet. But when the dog or the cat, in that matter, slips sliding around on that table, it wants to right itself and it can't, and that triggers a primal fear.
Okay.
And I mean, that's a very simple thing you can do to make that first trip to the vet nice. Very, very simple thing you can do. The thing about new things, new anything, is both scary and attractive. A new thing is attractive if you let the animal voluntarily approach it. Okay, but if a new thing is scary, if you suddenly just jam it in the animal's face, a sudden thing that startles an animal is scary. So give an animal to kind of sniff and explore, something that's new. Don't just, jam it into it. Let's say you take something like an umbrella. If you just put an umbrella on the living room floor, the puppy would come up and kind of sniff it and poke at it. Now, if you suddenly opened that in the puppy's face, it's going to scare the puppy.
Right.
Give animals a chance to seek. Turn on that system in the brain that makes them want to explore. And these brain circuits, things for seeking, those have all been validated in neuroscience, and I cover a lot of that information in my book, Animals Make Us Human.
Okay.
The whole first chapter is on the the basic emotional systems that Jack Panscap first outlined. But now there's been new research that shows that in the nucleus accumbens of the brain, it's sort of like a teeter-totter, and it either can go into fear mode or it can go into seek mode. It can switch back and forth. And you have an animal that's really high-strung, it's more sort of biased towards the fear mode, but you want to try to get the seeking turned on when you're introducing something new.
Okay. Thriving Canine has done a lot of child dog safety seminars on that same, train of thought, where we suggest that that children stand still like a statue and just let the dog come over to them. And it sounds to me like the key there is the motion, because the seeking, the exploring.
Well, and then you see the other thing is rapid motion. Very rapid motion can either scare or it can trigger the prey drive, the chase instinct. Rapid motion is very, very stimulating to the brain.
Right.
Now, I think it's very important that young puppies get socialized, to toddlers, because the young puppy's got to learn that the little people are people too. You see, because think about it. A toddler is a different picture than a grown-up person. And they've got to learn that those little people are people. So I think it's important for puppies to interact with toddlers. Now, you want to make sure this is a pleasant experience, that the toddlers aren't grabbing the puppy and treating it roughly. Just petting the puppy gently and getting the puppy, taking puppy to daycare center. I think it'd be a really good idea, and you want to make sure it's supervised. And the children just to very gently interact with the little puppy. make it a pleasant experience. And the dog learns what children are.
As opposed to, and also educating the children in how to be gentle so that they're not running up.
Absolutely. You need to be educating the children. You pet the puppy gently. The other thing you want to teach people to do is stroke the animal. Don't pat. A lot of animals interpret patting as hitting. You want to stroke your animal. Don't do tickle touches, because that sets off kind of an alerting response. You want to just stroke it. You want to stroke it the way the mother dog's tongue is going to stroke it.
Okay. And what would you say to individuals who wonder if animals sense? Do they sense fear? Do they smell fear? Do they know when we're in a good mood? Do they know
I think
when we're
animals
in a bad
can
mood?
tell who's afraid of them and who likes them, and I think they definitely can tell that, because I've seen a lot of cats, boy, they'll jump right on the lap of a guy who hates cats every time.
Right, and do you attribute that to their heightened sense of smell?
It could be, fear. You could have a, really, really scared person. You could have a smell thing. I think some of it's the way people move. I find some people move with a lot of jerky motion, and they don't get along with animals very well.
Huh.
I think they pick up a lot of subtle, body posture cues, either visual things, sound things, and maybe some smell things.
Yeah, in the animal behavior world, particularly dogs, there's this great big question that people have. Is there such a thing as animal dominance? What would your response to that be?
Well, they certainly are. Animals have dominance hierarchies. I mean, if you have a bunch of cattle, for example, there's going to be a boss cow, and she's going to eat first.
Okay.
And dogs do have form hierarchies. And the reason why a lot of animals form hierarchies is so they don't constantly fight. If they didn't have some hierarchies, they'd be constantly fighting all the time. And in my book, Animals Make Us Human, kind of discuss the idea of treating, kind of being more like families. I mean, even in normal families, the children usually obey the parents.
Yes.
I don't know. Some of this gets into different use of words. Now, forcefully exerting dominance on dogs, like this, forcing dogs down and doing alpha rolls, that's just stupid. First of all, when a subordinate dog rolls over in front of a dominant dog, the subordinate dog does it voluntarily. The dog doesn't jam it down.
Right.
That's not how it works. I can think about dogs that we had. Our dog was definitely subordinate to Lightning, the dog that lived next door, but our dog would go over to Lightning's house. He'd go to Lightning's house. And then he'd get over there and he'd roll over, and Lightning would sniff him, and, they'd run around and play together, but Lightning definitely was the boss over Andy. And Andy would actually go to Lightning's place, and the minute he got over there, he rolled over. Lightning didn't force him to do that.
Right.
If you want, do the rolling over thing, just teach the dog to roll over.
Right.
You don't have to force it. That's stupid. Now, if I think it's, if you just teach the dog to roll over and enjoy being stroked on the stomach, that will turn on that. It's a fixed action pattern that's hardwired into the dog, and you can turn it on with all positive methods. Throwing a dog down, that's stupid.
Right.
That's not what another dog does.
Right. And in your opinion, this idea, and you related it just a moment ago to children realizing that their parents are in charge, the sense of, if there's a nice sense of respectful leadership in the house where
that's right.
The dog
that's right. That's absolutely right. And that's what I talk about, Animals Make Us Human, in the dog chapter. Think of it sort of more like family and leadership.
Right. So that there is an importance of the dog understanding that there's a sense of leadership in the house to where, the humans are in charge, like I said, respectfully, but the humans are in charge, and that seems to relax the dog away from that responsibility.
Well, that's right. Also, there's differences in dog personalities. Some dogs are much more fearful, and other dogs are kind of much more assertive. There's you have a dog that's very, very assertive. It might be more important to make sure it sits before it eats, and it sits before it goes outside and obeys. In other words, it's got to work to get something from you. Then you got some little border collie that, is real smart but easily traumatized. You don't do that to the border collie.
Right.
I think people need to look at individual differences. There's a tendency in dog training to think one size fits all.
Yes.
And that's just not right.
Agree. I absolutely agree. So, can you talk to me a little bit more about associative memory for dogs?
Well, basically, they have a problem with higher order association. A person, if they got hit by a car, would never associate it with a place.
Right.
They'd associate it with cars. But if a dog gets hit by a car and he was just looking at, the Joneses mailbox, he might associate it with the Joneses mailbox. They'll just make that first association. Now, if they got hit by enough cars and managed to survive it, they probably would realize it was a car.
Right.
But animals have a hard time with the sort of higher order associations. This is the big difference between human beings and dogs.
So animals they're not completely seeing in black and white, but they're...
No, animals have a partial color vision. They do not see red. Dogs and horses and cattle, they're all dichromats. They see yellowish green well. They see blue and purple really well, but they don't see red. Red's going to appear as black or gray, and that gives the animal better contrast vision and better night vision. Animals are a lot more sensitive to contrast of light and dark than people are. Only the people, birds, and primates have full color vision.
Can you explain to me a little bit more about the visual systems of animals?
The visual system on cattle and horses is designed to scan the horizon while the animal's grazing, looking for danger. Where the dog, on the other hand, and the cat, which are both predators, visual system, the eyes are closer together, it's easier to judge distance.
Okay. And the reason I ask is we have a little tiny dog named Missy, and she'll do this thing at night when she decides that another dog is on the bed that she wants to be on, where she kind of puts her head down a little bit and she'll just stare straight into the dog's eyes until...
Oh, that's a hard stare. Wolves do that too. They'll do a hard stare.
The hard stare, and then eventually these 90-pound dogs who could, step on her because she's so tiny, they get off the bed.
Well, and a lot of it has to do with how they're brought up. I mean, if she was the dominant adult dog when those big dogs are puppies, those dogs almost don't realize how big they are.
So does size matter in the dog world? Because clearly our 90-pound dogs will bow down to our 20-pound dog.
Well, if they get in a fight, size is going to matter. But
right.
The thing is that a lot of social behavior is learned behavior. I mean, there's a book called Unlikely Friendships that's about, animals that would normally be predators and prey living together. I was just over at a friend's house, and her great big Rottweiler cross, sleeps with the cat curled up against it.
Right.
Well, they've grown up together. And you don't eat the animals that you grow up with. I mean, so a lot of social behavior is learned. And if the little dog is dominant in the beginning, the big dog, will back off because a lot of things are learned. You don't want the big dog to ever learn that maybe he could step on the little poodle.
Right. It's
just like people that raise pet tigers. That's not something I recommend. I've talked to somebody who had a pet tiger, and their dog was dominant over the tiger. And the tiger's like 500 pounds, and Kitty doesn't realize he weighs 500 pounds.
Right.
And if you have a pet tiger, you don't want the kitty to find out he weighs 500 pounds.
Sure.
Because when he discovers what he can do with the 500 pounds, then you're really in trouble.
Yes.
You don't want Kitty to find out that he could just one swipe of his paws knock you over.
Right.
You don't want him to find that out.
How important is consistency, in your opinion? How important is consistency in training a dog?
I think it's very important.
Repetition.
I think it's very important. Otherwise, they get confused. Let's take something like a service dog. You train a service dog that when the vest is on, it's work. And when the vest is off, you can go play and run around. Well, you want to make sure you're consistent. I went to an autism convention one time, and this little autistic boy had his service dog down on the floor, rolling around all over the floor with his vest on. I said, don't do that with his vest on.
Right.
That's going to confuse him. If you want to roll him on the floor, you take the vest off.
Right.
Because he's got to learn that certain behaviors, like rolling on the floor and jumping on people, or other things like that, are behaviors you don't do when you're in service dog mode. And animals make categories of behaviors to do on a leash, behaviors to do off a leash. Maybe when I'm on a leash, I protect the owner. When I'm off, I can go play with the other dog rather than protect the owner. And with a service dog, you don't want to confuse those categories.
Okay.
It's the same thing with a dog for a blind person. Boy, when the blind person lifts that handle up, man, the dog better be worked Totally.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And it's really important, and if the blind person wants to play with the dog, then take the harness off.
Okay.
And that keeps the categories clear in the animal's brain. It takes, like with the service dog, it takes like 5 seconds to take the vest off. Just take it off.
Right.
And then because rolling around on the floor and jumping on people, you don't want them doing that behavior when they're wearing the vest.
Right. For all of the dog trainers that may be listening out there, there is sort of a dichotomy happening in the dog training world, which is a lot of the positive reinforcement trainers are dead set against using compulsion training or corrections while training their dog. And then on the other side of the fence, you've got people who are using compulsion training and really disagreeing with this whole notion of giving a treat for every single thing that the dog does right. Where do you sit in this spectrum of dog training?
Well, I think that there's different things. What I've noticed is that different types of trainers tend to work better with different types of dog personalities.
Okay.
Give me something specific.
Sure.
I'd rather talk about something specific rather than a generality on this.
There are some schools of thought that say you would never correct a dog while there's, let's say a dog has done something.
When you say correct a dog, tell me exactly what you mean by that.
Okay,
I have to have a picture in my mind.
Sure. So let's say that you're walking down the road and you are training your dog to heel at your side. And let's say all of a sudden a squirrel runs by and the dog wants to go after the squirrel. Now, obviously, if you're training a service dog for a blind person, that would need to be corrected. Otherwise,
absolutely.
So by correcting, a leash correction maybe, or
no, a jerk on it maybe a little bit or something.
Yeah, exactly. So the two camps in the dog training world seem to be positive reinforcement only, where you would never correct a dog for behavior you don't want. You would simply wait for them to offer the behavior that you do want. And then the other school of thought is the other camp, the other side of the coin is you have to correct a dog every time he does something wrong. Every time that he does something wrong, you need to explain to the dog in a way that he can understand through either a verbal correction or a physical correction. It can't always be just, I'm waiting for you to offer me the behavior that you want.
Well, I think my view is going to be somewhat more near the middle.
Yep.
And the thing is different kinds of dogs can respond to different kinds of things. Now, really abusive stuff, yes, I'm absolutely totally against that.
Sure.
Now, one thing I've noticed on the whole positive thing, like I go over to Barnes & Noble bookstore and go through every dog training book I can find. I take them out and I look up aggression. What do you do with real severe aggression? And I've noticed that a lot of books on 100% positive dog training, like sort of avoid that subject.
Yeah.
What do we do about cat killing, for example?
Right.
That kind of thing just gets avoided. Now, for teaching skills like agility courses, teaching a dog to do tricks, that ought to all be positive.
Yes.
Teaching dogs to just do basic things. But if I got a cat killer, a dog has killed several cats, I don't know any positive way to stop that.
Right.
If I want to have it live with cats.
And that is
and the thing is, if you and to stop that, you're probably gonna have to do something pretty harsh with a shock collar. But if it's done right, it's only done once, and then you've cured it. And then you talk about what is a correction. I was at airport security one time, and I thought this was just awful. And I was putting my luggage through the X-ray machine. And there was a policeman there with his German Shepherd, and the dog looked at a little small dog that was in a kennel, and he lifted this dog right up off the ground by the choke chain, right at airport security. Now, I didn't say anything, because when I'm in airport security, I don't want to get in trouble, but I thought that was just awful. Now, there's a difference between lifting a dog off the ground. What if he just pulled on the leash as a little tiny jerk?
Right.
That may be just a signal.
Yes.
That may be just a signal. That's not anything punishing. It's just a signal telling a dog to not look at that poodle.
Right.
There's a big difference between, you see, someone could call lifting the dog off the ground
for something
and
so
maybe doing
minor.
a little tiny jerk is both a correction.
Right.
Now, I think lifting a German Shepherd off the ground by choke chain to stop it from looking at some little poodle or whatever it was that was there, that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong.
Right.
But maybe a little tiny jerk to tell him not to look at the poodle, that would be appropriate.
Right.
So you get in, you see, I'm being a visual thinker. You take a word like correction, that's a very vague word to me. And so when I start thinking about a little tiny jerk, I see one thing, and then when I see a real harsh correction, lifting a German Shepherd up off the floor at the airport with a choke chain, that's totally horrible. My feeling is I want to do everything positive, but there's certain very bad things with prey drive, like cat killing, and certain very bad things with aggression that I notice that the positive dog training books tend to ignore, and I've gone through the indexes of quite a few of them.
And that goes back to your comment of dog training is not a one-size-fits-all program.
Well, now, there's certain really rough things that I just don't think should ever be done. I mean,
Sure.
I've heard that people take a dog and they windmill the dog. That's just torture.
That's ridiculous.
That's just abuse.
Of
and
course.
You absolutely should never do anything like that. And for teaching tricks, you want to teach dog tricks, that needs to be all done positive,
Sure.
100%, totally positive. But then on the other hand, to just teach it to sit, I think popping a treat every 5 seconds for making it sit is a bit, a bit excessive. And it's also not very practical. I don't tell a dog to sit. I shouldn't have to give it a treat to tell a dog to sit. I remember one time looking at this old video, Dr. Pryor's video on clicker magic, and they were using the clicker to teach a cat how to do an agility course. That was absolutely marvelous. Use the clicker to teach a dog to sit. I think it's kind of silly.
Well,
this is where. But on the other hand, in my book, Animals Make Us Human, I've got a lot of stuff in there about clicker training and to teach a horse how to do some complicated dressage movements.
Yeah.
It might be just the thing that would be just perfect. And a lot of people resist the idea of doing that. And then, of course, I got to fade out the clicker. But to teach that horse to do something very complicated, you see, the advantage I have with that clicker is if I say, let's say the horse does the lead change the way I want him to do it, and I say, good boy, and I stroke him, he's already made 4 or 5 movements.
Right.
The horse isn't going to know which movement goes with my reward.
Uh-huh.
The click, I can reinforce the exact motion that I wanted. So I'm much more, more to take an eclectic view, because I'm also a bottom-up thinker. People that are top-down thinkers want to get a theory and then push everything into it. I'm a bottom-up thinker.
Okay.
And I take specific examples. Well, okay, what is a correction? Is it just a little jerk of the leash, or is it lift the dog up off the ground by the choke chain, which I think was totally wrong.
So when you say...
all he did was look at the poodle.
Right. When you say that you're a bottom-up thinker, can you explain that?
What I mean by a bottom-up thinker is I take specific examples, and I put those specific examples into categories. Okay, let's take the category of correction. Okay, there's like 2 extremes of this. One would be a tiny little jerk on the leash, where it's just simply a signal to the dog, just a signal. Another would be, lifting the dog up by the choke chain. But those are both could go in the verbal word of correction.
Okay, right. Where
You see, that's the problem is the word correction is vague. And the other thing I think we got to look at is dog personality.
Okay.
The kind of way you would deal with a very high-strung, very anxious dog you maybe got from a shelter that had been abused. That dog you want to be really gentle with because it's easily traumatized.
Right.
Then you might have another dog who's got a real assertive personality and he's always pushing the boundary a bit. They need a more assertive type of training.
Yes.
There's individual differences, and that's something people aren't looking at.
Excellent point.
The other thing is on things where very harsh correction has worked, it's done only once or twice.
Right.
And then it's over with.
Yes.
You see, it's the same thing with children. If you're just hitting kids all the time, that's just child abuse.
Right.
But sometimes there's a situation for a very harsh correction. And when I was out on a construction project, on one of my cattle projects, I was talking to one of the welders, and he was telling me that when he was about 10 years old, he abused a dog. And his dad really worked him over with a belt and said, now you know what the dog felt like. And you know what? It never happened again. It never happened again. It was a single, really harsh correction. He says, now I'm going to make you feel like how the dog felt.
Right.
And he never, ever, ever abused an animal ever again.
Uh-huh.
You see, and so when a very harsh correction is used, it's a single thing. Hitting either dogs or kids all the time is totally abusive.
Right.
But, there's certain, I can remember when I was a child, I can only remember getting spanked twice, but I knew that if I wrecked my mother's living room, what happened to my bud? And the living room door was always open. I was allowed to go in there, and I'd sit in there and I'd read boating magazines But I was very careful because that was the grown-up room.
Yes. I remember I was forcefully grabbed by my arms as a child by my dad once, and it was for running across a street when cars were coming. And I remember it wasn't a severe correction. It wasn't, I didn't get, spanked to death or, but he held me by my arms and squeezed and said, "Don't ever run into the street." And I'll never forget that. I thought, wow, okay, well, and I never did. I never ran into the street after that again because
this is the problem. There's certain things. You see, I think like doing a more operant conditioning, clicker training approach, where that really works is if you got to teach that dog how to do something really complicated. That's where that really works. You want to teach dogs to do agility, go through all kinds of obstacles. That's where the clicker training really, really, really works. But on the other hand, I don't think I could throw a dog a treat every time it fits. Right. Dogs are social, and they will do things just for social.
Well, and if the dog all of a sudden goes into prey drive mode on a hike off leash and starts, chasing a deer, and you want to call that dog off the deer, no amount of treats and clicks are going to get that dog back to you.
No, that's the problem. And prey drive is one of the things that I noticed that most of the positive training books just ignore that. Because if you've got a cat killer or a sheep killer or a deer killer, if you've got two choices, you could lock the dog up in the backyard, which is going to be miserable, or you could do one harsh lesson with a shock collar. And it's very, very important that he never, ever, ever figures out the collar did it. You want to wear the collar for a few days, and then you go out where the deer are at, and just as he gets up to the deer about ready to bite, the deer gods get him, and you know what? There's a good chance he'll be cured, and he'll never go near deer again.
And the same,
and
rattlesnake
done right,
training.
It's a single correction, and then it's over with.
Right.
And then you cured the deer killing or the cat killing. And I know dogs where sheep killing has been cured by that method, and the farmer was going to kill the dogs. And that method was used. It was a single, very, very harsh correction, and that dog never went after sheep ever again. It cured it.
If I hear you correctly, and I think, I'm on the same page, there's a time and place for all methods of dog training.
When Caesar first started his program, he did not know how to deal with separation anxiety. He was just worthless. And with the fear dogs, he was worthless. But he was very good with some of the really aggressive kind of, pit bulls and Rottweilers. But I've noticed over the years that Caesar's getting gentler and doing a better job with the fear dogs.
Oh, interesting.
And he's been getting a lot of consultation. His latest book actually had clicker training in it.
Oh, okay. Well, and that's where I would like to see, instead of the dichotomy of the two different types of dog training being on opposite ends, I'd like to see there be more of a cooperation between the two.
Well, I think there should be, and I think there's certain very harsh things that should never be done. Windmilling a dog, that's just abusive. You should never, ever do that.
Uh-huh.
I was over at a dinner party one time, and they had a dog there, and they had the buffet table all set up, and I was the only one who happened to see this, and the dog was just getting ready to snack off the buffet table, and I just went, ah, ah, ah.
Yeah.
You know what? He was right off that buffet table.
Right.
And that's all I did. And he got away from that buffet table. He knew darn well he wasn't supposed to be snacking off that table.
Sure.
And that's all I did. That I just made this sound like that. So when the dog's head, I did it just as the dog's head was going up, over the top of the table. I did it, and he backed right off, and he didn't go near the table.
So what would you have done if he didn't back off and he actually put his paws on the table and went for
I would have gone up there, probably pulled him off.
Yeah. Pull him off by the collar.
If he actually started eating the food, I would have pulled him off.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
He's eating our dinner.
I agree.
What am I supposed to do? Am I going to clicker him to get him not eat our dinner? I don't think so. Now I'm not gonna. All I would do is pull him off and say no.
Yeah.
Also, they understand tone of voice.
Right.
If you went up to your dog and you go, "Oh, I just hate you. You're so horrid."
Right.
Well, he'd be wagging his tail because of the tone of voice.
Right.
Animals react to tone of voice.
Yes.
And see, when I did that,
yes.
You see, that's the kind of tone of voice that just meant no. And I just kind of instinctively did it. I mean, I was there at this dinner party. There probably were 20 people there. And for some reason, I just happened to be the one close enough to the table to see the dog start to do it. And I made that noise just as the dog's head started to go up over the table where it got close to the food.
Sure. I think tone of voice is very important because...
it's really important.
you can say something very mean in a lovely voice, and they think it's affectionate, or you could say something really nice to them in a harsh voice, and they're going to cower.
Well, that's right, because they're tuning in the tone of voice, and my tone of voice was basically get off that table. You've got no business
Right.
getting on the dining room table.
I have a question from an individual that I'd like to ask you. I actually spoke with her yesterday, and she says, if you're speaking to Temple, could you please ask her a question for me? So
Okay.
This question is from a woman named Leslie, and she professionally trains St. Bernards as anchoring dogs for autistic children to help keep them safe.
Okay.
And she would like to better understand from you, as an autistic adult, why do autistic children run towards something that interests them in spite of danger?
I think sometimes autistic kids don't recognize danger. They just see something that's interesting, maybe a flag or maybe something, and they just want to run towards it. And I think sometimes they don't understand cause and effect. Well, if you get hit by a car, you're going to get hurt. Now, one of the things that helped me understand that you don't want to get hit by a car was when I saw a squashed squirrel on the road. And it was just sort of a teachable moment. And I was told basically that if I got hit by a car, I'd be like that squirrel. And I could tell by looking at that completely flattened squirrel that definitely wasn't going to come back alive again.
Right.
And because autistic kids have problems sometimes, especially very severe autistic kids, with cause and effect. Well, if I get hit by a car, I'm going to get hurt. They don't understand that. They don't recognize the danger.
Okay. So how does the world look from your perspective for those of us that don't understand?
Well, I didn't do that.
Okay.
I had it drilled into me not to run across the street. By the time I was 4 years old, I was fully verbal. This tends to be much more of a problem in kids that are more severe, that are nonverbal.
Okay.
They, I did not run across the street. I had the safety rules drilled into me, and I was really careful about looking both ways before you cross, make sure there are no cars coming. But you take a child that's nonverbal. Some of these kids, their sensory world is really disordered. Their seeing might be kind of a kaleidoscopic jumble.
Okay.
And so they're not realizing the car is there.
Right.
It can be very variable. But there's a certain subgroup of autistic kids that are runners that just run away.
And in this kaleidoscopic jumble, if you see something out of the corner of your eye that's, maybe wiggling quickly or brightly colored, and it just grabs your attention, and it's the only thing maybe...
Well, what's happened is the kids also have poor impulse control.
Okay.
They see something that grabs their attention, and they just want to get over to it.
Yes. And so is it fair to say that your impulse control isn't as severe as some of the autistic children that you're working with today? Okay.
I mean, autism's a continuum, and now my impulse control was better. And I was never not going to run out to the street in front of a car.
Right. Okay. And so this idea of training St. Bernards to be anchor dogs to help keep the children safe seems...
Well, for certain kids, that would be a good thing. Now, I want to make sure that we take some precautions so the St. Bernard doesn't get stressed. He needs to have some time where he's off duty, where he can just play. You take the vest off, you take all the harness or whatever he's got on off, and he goes out with the parents, and the dog has a chance to play and be a dog. That's really important that the dog has time off. Now, because being an anchored dog, that's much more stressful for the dog than just a regular, companion service dog would be. Okay,
and wouldn't that be the case for any working dog, that they sort of get to turn it off and go be a dog?
That's right. They need some time off. Like you take even the dog for the blind person. Well, the blind person gets home at night. You take the harness off. The dog can go, do stuff. Now, of course, the blind person isn't going to be able to take the dog out and play ball with it because he can't see to do that.
Right.
And you take the service dogs that you're using with these autistic kids. I think in some ways that's more stressful to the dog sometimes than being a seeing eye dog would be.
Okay.
Or a guide dog for the blind. Having to be tethered to this autistic kid. Some of those dogs with a real severe autistic kids don't bond with the kid. Now you take an autistic kid that has a service dog, higher functioning kid, he'll bond with the dog, but And that dog's not used as an anchor dog.
Sure. If there was any question that I forgot to ask or anything that you wanted to mention, I'd love to hear it now. Is there anything that I forgot to ask?
To understand animals, you need to get away from verbal language. You need to enter a sensory-based world, a world of pictures, a world of little smell whiffs, a world of sound, a world of tastes. It's sensory-based information. It's not verbal. And that's probably one of the most important things I can tell you. Also, you need to understand which emotional system's motivating an animal. If a dog bites due to fear, you punish it, that's going to make it worse. You've got to figure out, is fear motivating the behavior, or maybe aggression, or maybe you've just got a dog that's high energy and it wants to run around and seek is motivating behavior. Got a dog that's high energy, needs somebody to take it out and throw the ball for it or throw the frisbee for it and like, get it to do lots of seeking activities.
Yep.
Different animals are motivated by different things. You've got some real high energy dogs, and they would not be a very good choice for an older couple living in an apartment.
Right.
Because they need somebody to take them out and run and really do a lot of vigorous activities.
Okay. And in the dog world, do dogs tend to want to get along? Is that a natural tendency for there to be peace in the pack?
Well, yeah, most dogs do want to get along. Let me tell you where you're going to have a lot of problems with animals getting along. Animals reared alone. Let's say you have a puppy and you rear it alone and it never has any contact with other dogs, and then it grows up, there's no contact with other dogs, it will often viciously fight other dogs.
Okay.
I've seen that with horses. I've seen that in cattle. It's very important to socialize animals young to other animals. Otherwise, you don't learn the give and take of social relations, when to submit, when not to submit. And you can have a dog that's reared alone that won't get along with other dogs, and it can be a real problem because they've got to learn social rules when they're young. And this is why when you get a puppy, it's so important to take it out to the dog park, and it's got to have some time off leash to learn how to interact with other dogs. Because if it doesn't learn this, when it grows up, you'll get some really awful problems with dog-to-dog aggression, and it's very, very difficult to deal with.
Right. Chad, the dog trainer for Thriving Canine, does a puppy basic obedience and socialization class where the first 20 minutes of that class is the puppies are off leash and they're playing. And
I think that's really, really, really good. That's really a good thing.
In your opinion, what is that critical socialization window?
Just as soon as you get them. Just about, you could take a puppy over to a daycare center and let the kids gently pet it.
10, 12 weeks,
Introduce it to other dogs that aren't going to have diseases.
Right.
Be careful on which dogs they introduce it to. But they need to start learning from a young age that, how to socialize.
Would you say that young age, 12 weeks, about 12
weeks? Yeah,
weeks?
something like that. Yeah, real young age.
Okay.
Not 6 months.
Yeah, and getting puppies socialized at a young age not only helps with animal aggression, I would imagine it also helps them comfortable around different types of people, tall people, short people.
And we can start socializing dogs to different kinds of people right as soon as you get them. Now, you've got to be careful not to do sensory overload. I wouldn't take the dog into some downtown with just crowds and crowds of people, because you can get the kind of a sensory overload, get the puppy just overwhelmed.
Yep.
So be careful. But I'd want to be socializing him to people. Let's say somebody comes over to your house. You introduce them to the puppy. Take it over to a daycare center, or take it away to the next door neighbor kids and let the little kids gently pet it.
Yep.
From the minute you get the puppy, I want it to get used to other people. Have other people touch it and pet it, but you just want to make sure you don't get overwhelming.
Yeah,
I wouldn't take the puppy to a football game, for
Sure.
example. I think that might be a really bad idea,
Right.
because that would just be, for a little small puppy, just too overwhelming. But then gradually you want to get the dog used to more and more things.
And getting the dog used to being touched, having his ears gently rubbed.
That's right.
Having his tail.
Absolutely. And I want to get it used to having different people touch it gently.
Yeah. So that, that'll all help with, if a dog is used to having his ears gently rubbed or his tail gently rubbed and his paws.
That's right. But you gradually just get him, used to more and more things.
So, Temple, you've written how many books now?
I've got about 10 books now, about half of them on autism, about half of them on animals. I have a book called Genetics and the Behavior of Domestic Animals. It's a textbook on animal behavior. I've got Animals in Translation. Animals Make Us Human. I have Humane Livestock Handling. That's strictly a book on handling cattle. So I've got a number of different books. Thinking in Pictures is one of my main autism books. Another autism book is The Way I See It. Just a real basic book for parents and teachers.
Well, I have really enjoyed this time that we've spent together doing this interview. And for all of the listeners out there that are in other countries who maybe have never heard of Temple Grandin before, I'm just going to do a quick introduction. Temple Grandin is an American doctor of animal science and a professor at Colorado State University and a best-selling author, and she is also a consultant to the livestock industry and responsible for a majority of the slaughterhouses that humanely slaughter animals here in America.
Well, I've done a lot of work with major restaurant companies like McDonald's on auditing animal welfare in slaughter plants because I can't emphasize enough the importance of good management. Equipment's only half the equation. The other half of the equation is management that cares.
Absolutely. It's, as you mentioned in your book, you can have all the fancy tools and contraptions in the world, but if the handling is no good, then it's not going to work, right?
Well, that's right. You've got to have the management to go with it. And if you're interested in livestock things, I have a website, Grandin.com. It's just my last name, Grandin.com.
Okay.
The TempleGrandin.com is an autism site, but Grandin.com, just my last name, is my livestock website.
Okay. Well, I've learned quite a bit from you today, Temple, and I know that you're a very busy woman. You spend much of your time traveling around the world doing seminars on autism, seminars on animal behavior, doing auditing and consulting work for livestock outfits across the country. So you are home today in Colorado, and I really appreciate you taking this time to speak to our global audience about animal behavior from a different perspective.
Well, thank you very, very much, and I really enjoyed being on your show.
It has been a pleasure, Temple. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. And for all of you thriving Canine radio listeners tuning in from around the globe, you've just listened to another episode of In the Field, where today we were talking to Temple Grandin about another perspective on animal behavior. Be sure to stay tuned as we've got a lot more interesting programming coming your way. But for now, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Rocket Man till the party ends. Take a long ride through the dangerous sky.